10 names. Everyone was written down over 1,000 years ago. Everyone is still carried by someone alive right now. This video is not about what these surnames mean, but about finding the first human being ever recorded carrying yours and what was happening to them on the day somebody wrote it down. Type your surname in the comments now before you know the answer. One rule, because it decides everything that follows. Before 1066, almost nobody in England had a surname. They had bynames, extra words tacked on to tell two men called Wynflæd apart. A handful survived the conquest and hardened into the family names we still carry. So, the earliest time one of those words appears attached to a named person in a document we can actually date. That last part matters. You'll see why at number 4. Number 10, Long. The surname comes from the Old English lang, meaning tall. It is about as plain as a name can get, and our earliest bearer appears around the year 983 at Peterborough Abbey as Aethelric the Long. That sounds almost too simple to be interesting, but the simplicity is exactly why it survived. A description that obvious could be invented independently in 100 villages that had never spoken to each other, which is why Long turns up everywhere. The Normans even brought their own version, Le Long, and the two forms sat side by side for centuries. And look at why Aethelric is in the record. He wasn't a king or a bishop. He was standing surety on a land agreement, guaranteeing it with his own name. In Anglo-Saxon England, a transaction was only as good as the men who stood behind it. If your name is Long, the first man to carry it was a man whose word was good enough to secure land, and it never went away. Long is still among the 200 most common surnames in England and Wales, over 1,000 years after Aethelric put his name to that agreement. The next name comes from the very same document, and it isn't about height at all. Number 9, Little, from the Old English Lytel, and on the same Peterborough parchment as Aethelric the Long, in the same list of guarantors, is a man called Edric the Little. So, a short man, obviously. Not necessarily. Lytel also marked out the younger of two men who shared a name, the less senior one, the one who came second. Think about what that means. In a village where 6 men might answer to Edric, you didn't need a clever nickname. You needed to know which Edric. Long and little weren't insults or compliments. They were a filing system. The tallest, the smallest, the older, the younger. Hold on to that idea because it comes back at number 1 in a way you won't expect. If your name is Little, the first man to carry it may not have been small at all. He may simply have been the second one. Little never became common. It sits somewhere around the 350th most used surname in England and Wales. Not rare, but nothing like Smith or White. A name that survived 1,000 years without ever really spreading. Our next name belongs to a man who was, at the time, someone's property. In 975, a document at Durham records a woman freeing the people she owned. Exiard is one of them, and beside his name is the word Smid. Here's the part that changes how you hear it. 975 was a famine year in England, and in a famine, some people did something we find very hard to sit with now. They sold themselves into slavery because a master had to feed you, and freedom didn't. We can't prove that's Exiard's story, but it's the world he's standing in on the day his name is written down. A man who may have traded his freedom for food, getting it back. Translators still argue whether that word is a name or a job. At this date, it's a byname at best. Inherited surnames don't exist yet, and there's a reason Smith looks like it appears late in the records. For centuries, scribes translated it. In Latin documents, a Smith is written Faber. The name was everywhere. It was just wearing a disguise. And today, Smith is the most common surname in England and Wales, the most common in Scotland, and the most common in the United States, where nearly 2.5 million people reported it at the 2010 census. All of it is traceable back to a man in a famine. If you're enjoying tracking these names back to real people, consider subscribing. Every surname has a first bearer, and most of them were nobody important, which is exactly what makes them worth finding. The next name doesn't mean what you think it means, not even slightly. In 955, King Edred granted land at Chesterfield to a man recorded as Edred Sild. Now Sild gives us the modern word child. So this was a boy? No. And this is my favorite piece of misdirection on the list. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Childe was a technical term for a young nobleman not yet knighted. not a kid, a knight in waiting. It's the same word in Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came, the line Browning borrowed from King Lear. That's why it sounds archaic and grand rather than juvenile. So if your name is Child, the first man recorded with it wasn't a child at all. He was a young man attached to a king's household, waiting for his sword. Child is rare today. You can go a lifetime without meeting one. But it's still out there, which is more than most Anglo-Saxon bynames managed. Almost all of them died. Our next two names come from one of the most extraordinary documents in English history, and it was written by a woman. Number 6, Cook. Around the year 950, a woman named Wynflæd had her will written down. It is the earliest surviving woman's will in British history, and it is astonishing. Her tents, her silver cups, an engraved bracelet, her nun's vestments. For the first time, we get to see the life of an Anglo-Saxon woman below royal rank. And there's a serious argument that Wynflæd was grandmother to 2 kings of England. You'd assume a will is a list of possessions. This one is also a document of freedom. Wynflæd frees people by name, and one of them is a man called Ælfsig with the word chalk written after him. There's a detail scholars have noticed. Several names in this will were squeezed in afterwards, as an apparent afterthought. People who would otherwise have stayed enslaved because somebody nearly forgot to write them down. If your name is Cook, the first man we can point to was being handed his freedom by a woman who made sure the scribe got everyone in. And Ælfsig's name outlasted the woman who freed him. Cook still sits just outside the 50 most common surnames in England and Wales. Number 5 is in that same will, but we don't know his name, and we never will. Number 5, Wright. From the Old English Wyrta, a maker. A few lines further down Wynflæd's will, another man is freed, and here the parchment is damaged. His personal name is physically gone, a hole in the vellum, 1,000 years wide. What survives is one word, Wyrta. Sit with that for a moment. We have a man from around the year 950 whose own name has been eaten by decay, and the only thing left of him is the word for what he made. He is remembered by his craft and nothing else. No family, no village, no name. Just the fact that he built things. He is, in a strange way, the perfect example of what this entire video is about. A surname is what outlasts a person. If your name is Wright, the earliest bearer we can find lost everything except his trade. And look what happened to it. Wright is inside the top 15 surnames in England and Wales. He lost his own name, and hundreds of thousands of people inherited the word for what he did. Now, number 4. This is where the internet gets it wrong, and where I have to disagree with almost everyone. The usual claim is that a man called Ælfhe Stib appears at King Ethelstan's Great Assembly at Thundersfield in the 930s. That would make him the second oldest man in this video. Except the standard reference work on Old English bynames dates him to around the year 1000, the reign of Ethelred the Unready. 60 years later, because the text he appears in survives mainly through later copies. So the honest answer is, we don't know. Stubbs might be number 4. It might not be on this list at all. What isn't in doubt is that it survived. There are somewhere around 14,000 Stubbs in England today. Not a common name, but not a vanishing one either. The name itself is Stib, a tree stump. You can still hear it in London. Stepney was Stebenhide, Stiba's landing place. Number 3 is one of the 15 most common surnames in England. Before the year 925, an Old English charter records a man called Wulfnoth Hwida. Whit, white. Pale hair, a fair complexion, possibly even light clothing. Straightforward enough. Except there's an older suggestion attached to this word that almost nobody mentions. That in some context, Hwida meant an armorer, a sword finisher. White may not be a description at all. It may be a trade. There's a trap here worth flagging. Bede tells a famous 7th century story about a man called Heribert the White, 300 years earlier. So why isn't he number 1? Because Bede wrote in Latin. He wrote albus, never the English word our surname descends from. The name has to be in English to count, and that one rule knocks out a lot of very confident internet answers. Wulfnoth's version 1. White is inside the top 20 surnames in England and Wales. Heribert's Latin one didn't survive as a surname at all. Number 2 is the best story in this video, and it starts with a stolen belt. Around the year 920, A nobleman named Ordlaf wrote to the King of England because he was about to lose a piece of land and needed to explain how he'd got it. The letter survives, a single sheet of parchment, and one of the best first-hand accounts we have of how Anglo-Saxon law actually worked. Here's what it says. A man called Helmstan stole a belt. Helmstan was Ordlaf's godson, sponsored by him at confirmation before the theft. So Ordlaf did what a godfather does. He went to the king, and the king was Alfred the Great. Alfred ruled that Helmstan could keep his claim to the land and ordered the dispute settled by arbitration. Then he named the arbitrators. One of them was Wynflæd the Black of Somerton. That's your number 2. A man handpicked by Alfred the Great to sit in judgment on a thief's land claim. And the story has an ending. Helmstan was caught again, stealing oxen this time. That second conviction is how Ordlaf ended up owning the land outright, and why he had to write the letter at all. If your name is Black, the first man we can name carrying it was trusted by the most famous king in English history to settle a dispute fairly. And Black is still with us, around 300th in England and Wales. Never common, never gone. 1,000 years on from a man Alfred trusted to judge a land dispute. Which brings us to number 1. And it's a joke the language played on us. The oldest surname on this list means young. Under the year 744, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the death of Wynflæd the Younger, Bishop of York. He's called the Younger for one reason. There was already a far more famous Wynflæd, a 7th century Bishop of York who fought with kings, was exiled repeatedly, and appealed to Rome. The younger man has a second name only because the older one was too famous to share. I'll be straight about the evidence. The event is 744, but our earliest manuscript was copied around 890 to 900. And this is a bishop's epithet, not a farmer's byname. It's the softest entry on the list, but it's still the oldest, and here's why it survived everything. Every generation produces 2 men with the same name. Smith needs a forge, Young needs only a family, which is why it's still inside the 50 most common surnames in England and Wales. And in Scotland, it sits in the top 20. 1,200 years after a bishop picked it up because somebody else got famous first. Now, if you search oldest English surname, you'll get a different answer to this entire video. You'll get Hat. That claim traces back to a Victorian argument built on a record nobody can date. It's been repeated for over a century because it's tidy, and it doesn't survive contact with the source. And then there's Brown, the name most of you were shouting at the screen. Brown is the second most common surname in Britain. It isn't here, because before the conquest, Brune wasn't a byname at all. It was a first name. The surname doesn't turn up until William le Brun in 1169. The second most common surname in Britain is by this measure too young. 4 of these 10 names come from just 2 documents. Cook and Wright are both in Wynflæd's will. Long and Little are both in that one Peterborough agreement. So these aren't the 10 oldest surnames in England. They're the 10 oldest we can prove. And that's a very different thing. Somewhere out there was a baker, a ward, a fisher, older than every man here. We just don't have their parchment. The oldest surname in England is partly an accident of what didn't burn. So tell me yours below. If it's on this list, say which number. If it's one of the near misses, say that too, because the next video is built out of the ones that just missed.